Of course, royalty meant quite a lot to us in those days, and Queen Mary, I can remember Queen Mary getting married, Princess Mary, I mean. Of course, we loved the Prince of Wales, Edward. We thought he was marvellous. When I was a teenager, he was wonderful. And when papers began to talk about him having these women friends, we were terribly disappointed. Because we'd expected such a lot for him. We'd followed him on all his travels. He'd been to all the different countries that we owned. Everybody had made such a fuss of him, and we felt disappointed because we felt that we'd looked forward so much to him the day when he would be king, and we always wanted him to find somebody like a fairy princess to marry, you see, and he didn't. We thought at one time he was going to marry the Princess of Holland, but she came over once or twice, but apparently it was no good. He didn't want her, and he didn't marry her. But we really thought that he was going to marry a Dutch princess at one time of day.
How much did you know about what was going on? Because I've heard that the papers didn't say very much. There was a conspiracy of silence.
No, we didn't. I think they knew it all in America long before we did. You see, he used to have all these... They'd say that he'd got weekend parties and all that kind of thing, but we didn't know women were attached to it. You see, it didn't occur to us. We thought that they were mainly the men and tennis matches and things like that. We never thought that anything else was going on at all. Of course, it did break eventually, and I mean, the government, Mr. Baldwin, had to sort of try to put a stop to it, you see, but it was no good.
This is Windsor Castle, His Royal Highness Prince Edward.
At long last, I am able to say a few words of my own. A few hours ago, I discharged my last duty as King and Emperor.
I was sitting there and I heard the abdication, and I cried, and my mother, and we felt so sad because we had expected so much from him because he was so well liked. You see, we'd had the First World War and he'd been out with the army there and he'd helped the miners and he'd done such a lot, and everybody thought that he was going to be a perfect king, and we'd so looked forward to him finding a lovely princess that we could all admire and see him marry, and all that was a disappointment. It had all gone, and Mrs. Simpson wasn't the type of person that anybody wanted him to be with at all. You see, especially as she'd already been divorced. We thought that was awful. Divorce was terrible in those days, and to think that she'd already been divorced and she was older than him, and we thought she'd trapped him. That's how we felt, as if she'd trapped him because he was so popular and, he was lovely to look upon. I can always remember one day coming home from work, and I was coming by Victoria Square, and they'd said that the Prince of Wales was coming through Birmingham, and I saw all these people, and I went and stood on the edge of the gutter, and he passed only a yard away from me. My heart was absolutely, it was wonderful to see him. But after that, of course, it was very, very sad. It was terribly sad. It was such a disappointment to everybody. I mean, if Mrs. Simpson had been a different type of person, they wouldn't have minded in the least. But she wasn't the type of person that we'd imagined him wanting. But everybody felt that he'd been trapped. That's how it was looked upon by us younger ones anyway.
Zu verlangen, dass ein unmöglicher Zustand auf dem Weg von friedlichen Revisionen bereinigt wird und die friedlichen Revisionen konsequent zu verweigern.
Elsewhere, matters of much more significance were shaping up. On the final weekend of peace, Friday the 1st to Sunday the 3rd of September 1939, Winifred was living in the Swansea Valley, South Wales.
On the Friday, when Hitler moved into Poland, I was going shopping, and 2 or 3 of my neighbours were standing there talking. This was the Friday. And they said, "Oh, Mrs. Barber, have you heard the news?" And I said, "Yes, I have. It's sad." And they said, "What do you think about it?" And I said, "Well, it's dreadful, really. I'm ever so sad." She said, "You don't think there's going to be a war, do you?" And I said, "Yes, I do." I said, "You know, Mr. Chamberlain has promised Poland that if they were attacked, we would go to their assistance. He won't let them down." And she looked so upset and frightened, and she looked at these other women, and they really thought there wasn't going to be a war. But I knew there was. I mean, I knew Mr. Chamberlain wouldn't let Poland down once he'd said that we'd go. So I said, "We're going up to Birmingham," I said, "tomorrow morning." This was on the Friday I was talking to them. "Tomorrow morning we're going up to Birmingham because we think if the war starts, you don't know what might happen. It might start air raids and we may not be able to get there, and so we're going for this weekend anyway." So of course we went up to my mother's.
This morning the British ambassador in Berlin handed the German government a final note stating that unless we heard from them by 11 o'clock that they were prepared at once to withdraw their troops from Poland, a state of war would exist between us. I have to tell you now that no such undertaking has been received, and that consequently this country is at war with Germany.
We heard the news, you see, on the radio about 11 o'clock, I think it was, in the morning, that Mr. Chamberlain told us that war had been declared on Hitler, on Germany. We had our dinner, and I remember we'd start back round about 4:30, 5 o'clock, but as soon as we'd had our dinner, we decided we'd better go back. So we started off and went back. We had Austin Ruby Saloon. They were wonderful little cars, really, because there was no heat in them. We had to wrap ourselves in car blankets and food muffs and all kinds of things to keep warm, and there was only one little wiper on the windscreen, nothing in front of me, of course. The government allowed us 4 gallons a month petrol during those first 3 years of the war, and so we used to save it so that we could come home to see our parents. Of course, we used to travel up to my mother's in Birmingham in the car. In the winter time it was terribly cold.